Welcome, Divanauts, once again to Cronista de Indias, the YouTube channel dedicated to Latin American studies by yours truly, Professor Andrea Lorena Fernandez from Pace University. Please follow me on Instagram for daily content or almost daily content, and also hit the subscribe button on the channel so you may never miss an episode of Latin American Divas. In the last episode, titled Gender and Nation Building, we studied the failure of independence movements, the themes of soberanas repúblicas. We went over two essays by Pamela S. Murray where we discussed things like social Darwinism, positivism, separate spheres, and other concepts that apply to the 19th century. And last, we read an excerpt from Latin American law. For the next 5 episodes, we're going to be rounding out the 19th century and we will reapply these concepts. So please see the previous episodes so you can follow the story for the next 5. In this present episode, episode 16, it's titled Flora Tristán, Tapada limeña, Tourism, Ethnography, Europhilia, 1838. In it, we study the transition between Colonial Marianismo into the Republican Motherhood, where concepts of economic liberalism, separate spheres, positivism, and social Darwinism inform women's behavior. We're going to focus on Flora Tristán and how she employs empiricism for ethnography when she visits Peru. Flora Tristán is a 19th century, her 19th century flavor of socialism is full of prejudice by our 21st century standards. We must remember that in 1838, feminism is embryonic. It's even hard to call it first wave feminism, though at this point we're beginning to focus on nation building, education, and Republican motherhood and practical education, which are all aspects of first wave feminism. We will see how Flora herself is more concerned with comparative ethnography and assimilation to European values of femininity than actually depict in Peru. So let's go to Republican motherhood. In the previous episode, we reviewed economic liberalism, a concept by Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, where if a government keeps its hands off the economy, then it will grow and it will naturally balance itself out and be fair for everybody. This doesn't hold true. Economic equality has nothing to do with justice. And in Latin America, this phenomenon provided a relative improvement for gender relations because it encouraged women to, at least economically, seek individuality, liberty, rationality, and progress, adopt a bourgeois work ethic, and to strive for education, for practical education. So we're not necessarily asking to go to college yet, but we're saying things like, in order to support my family decently after my husband is killed in war, I need to be able to be a teacher so I don't fall into things like prostitution, for example. So the women are making these claims and legal reforms are following through. In the 19th century, we actually endorsed the separate spheres. That's when it actually becomes boys wear blue, girls wear pink. Beforehand, colors were not assigned to any gender. In the 19th century, you are the most racist and sexist century there ever was. So women are supposed to be domestic, whereas men go out in public. This is used to justify divisions of labor with biology, and women are supposed to be angels to protect their families. So even breaking gender norms may be permissible so long as the family and the nation are part of the equation, and self-sacrifice is the theme. So women were excluded from politics, honestly. Let's go to positivism. So positivism is a phenomenon in the 19th century where empiricism equals progress equals order. So science solving all of life's problems. It's attached to laissez-faire and classical economic liberalism. It is anti-clerical. So for the first time in a long time, Latin American clerics are shaking in their cassocks, their outfits, their sotanas, because the governments are taking away land and secularizing education. And nothing frightens priests more than not being able to educate you. The positivist movement is also about naturalism, where you observe social vices and apply them to artwork. So in painting, this comes out as realism. So if you look up realism on the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you're going to pop up with a few paintings of people picking up hay or doing the harvest, for example, the most normal thing in the universe. Well, that is a result of positivism, and you will see it reflected in the novel and in literature as well. Social Darwinism replaces Aristotle's idea of the animal continuum, and it justifies the subjugation of other races, women, and children with the concept of survival of the fittest, which is not a conscious action in biology, whereas we humans, we can choose to be mean to each other. So it is not a great philosophy. It's not even applicable to biology in terms of how we think as human beings. So it is the magic ingredient, social Darwinism, for political conservatism, imperialism, and discouraging social reform. Let's take a look at an example of a positivist woman of the 19th century. Flora Tristán is a French-born Peruvian author. Her father was Peruvian, a feminist, a political activist, and she returns to Peru in 1833 to 1834 for 1 year to claim her inheritance because her father had passed away. But while she's at it, she writes a travel narrative, which was one of the genres that was endorsed and encouraged in women. This titled Peregrinations of a Pariah, 1838. So she says, compared to respectable European women who didn't leave the house without a chaperone, limeñas were frequently bold in their black head to toe and only one eye uncovered outfits. Really, it was just like this. You wore head to toe covered except your one eye. Which allowed them anonymity beyond the home and effectively eluded their husband's control. So the veil was called a manto and the skirt was called a saya. It was an adaptation to patriarchy that only survived in Lima. It has Mozarabic roots. For this, you may look at episode 7 with Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Her play, Los Empeños de una Casa, actually utilizes el tapado, or that type of headdress, for the characters to further the plot line. So you have an example in theater. The tapado was outlawed in Spain in the 17th century, and the reason was fear of transgenderism, because it was used by prostitutes, and if you were a male prostitute, you could cover yourself up and fake being female, and that terrified everybody. So they outlawed it in Spain, but allowed it to continue in the Americas, and it held on in Peru until the end of the 19th century. Modesty and invisibility equal freedom, and inevitably, because it was kind of restrictive looking costume, it was fetishized on the national and international level. So you have things like stamps from Peru during this period may actually feature a woman with her head covered, and she's like so sexy and appealing, but you can't see a thing. Flora Tristán actually made the connection between women's liberation and the emancipation of the working class. So nowadays we call that intersectionality. But Flora sees the failures of economic liberalism. She is a key figure in the historiography of feminism and socialism, not only in Latin America but across the world. She should be in everybody's encyclopedia. And if you really like to be entertained with her story, you need to check out Mario Vargas Llosa, The Way to Paradise. It's a novel by Nobel Prize winner, and it examines her life along with her grandson, the painter Paul Gauguin. So the script says we should go to Peregrinations of a Pariah. So ethnography is an interest in non-urban communities, and it applies social Darwinism towards women, Indians, and Africans. So we're going to read an excerpt from Peregrinations of a Pariah, where Flora says, "There is no place on earth where women are so freed and exercise so much power as in Lima. They seem to have absorbed for their use alone what little energy the warm, heated climate allows the fortunate inhabitants. In Lima, the women are as a rule taller and better built than men. At 11 or 12, they are fully developed. Nearly all of them marry at this age and are very fertile, commonly producing from 6 to 7 children. They have healthy pregnancies, give birth easily, and quickly recover. Nearly all of them nurse their babies, but they're always helped by a wet nurse, a custom which comes from Spain, where the children in well-to-do families always have 2 women to feed them." So things that we should know in this passage is that she's eroticizing the local woman for the male gaze. It makes you wonder who is her intended reader, because it sounds like she is advertising Peruvian women for even foreign investors, and this actually matches up with the oligarchy's interest in bringing foreign money in exchange for raw materials, so the women being part of the marketing ploy. She attributes physical features to location or climate. This is called geographical determinism, and it is absolutely not real. People's behavior don't actually change just because you live at a different latitude, but they truly believed in the colonial period and into the 19th century that if, for example, you lived in the equator, your head is going to get hot and you're not going to be able to reason because your head is frying. False. People in equatorial latitudes can think just fine. So she mentions that they are precocious and fertile. So two things that may be also said about the land. So what's the difference between land and female? As though women are representing Peru with their bodies. Gee, I wonder where that comes from. They are unique, and they encourage comparative ethnography. So with this brief description, she implies that there is wealth in Peru to attract foreign investment interest in tourism. She mentions that it takes 16 to 18 yards of silk or cotton to make the skirt alone. The manto may be black, navy, violet, maroon, or green, and they're always dark colors because pastels are reserved for prostitutes. Doesn't matter your social status, your arms will always be uncovered in this costume. And it shows how women were monopolizing the textile industry. Foreigners are aware of this costume and they come to Lima to see the women. They know the best place to enjoy the sight is a church. So here comes the anti-clericalism of the 19th century popping in. Church is a place to see and be seen. And disfrazadas, or in costume, all women look alike. So it affords them social invisibility. So by our 21st century standards, this form of feminism, this 19th century feminism, is prejudicial and embryonic and racist and social Darwinist, and it's got a bunch of ugly things. But we have to remember that Flora, we can't extract her from her time period, and she's focused on nation building, education, Republican motherhood, and practical education. So the things that she's going to emphasize will be those things that are beneficial to women and to the nation. So she says, I have it actually written out over here. Put a woman in a Paris gown and she's no longer the same person. One looks in vain for the seductive woman one encountered that morning in the church of St. Mary. For in Lima, foreigners go to church not to hear the monks sing, but to admire these unique women in their national costume. Men follow them with a burning desire to see their features, which they carefully hide from view. But it takes an expert to follow a woman in a saya, as the costume tends to make all women look alike. I can say without fear of contradiction that if a lovely form and magnetic glance were sufficient to ensure women the supremacy that they are destined to possess, the women of Lima in their sayas will be proclaimed the queens of the earth. But in this kind of beauty may excite the senses, only spiritual, moral, and mental qualities can prolong its reign. So the essay guides the European male gaze towards Lima with its women as the marketing ploy. This is meant to encourage investors, laissez-faire, and economic liberalism. We are used to men doing this, but do we hold Flora in a lesser regard because she chooses to do the same, to market her city by using the women? I wonder, leave comments. I wonder what you feel about this. Scientific empiricism is tinted with morality. Flora is not an impartial observer. We are a long way from investigative journalism. So she's an ethnographer, and her prejudices are going to come through. She says, only mental qualities can prolong woman's reign. So whereas we may be able to be queens with our beauty, it is our intellect that is most important. And this is first wave feminism, in spite of all this social Darwinism. Look at her recommendation. Wow. So she says, quote, through love and devotion that we honor the Creator, then woman has an uncontestable superiority over men, but she must cultivate her intelligence and exercise self-control in order to retain it. Only on those conditions can she acquire the influence with which comes from power that God has given her. But when she fails to recognize her mission, when instead of being an inspiration and improving his character, she seeks to seduce him, her authority disappears together with the desire she aroused. Thus, when these enchanting women of Lima, whom have never directed their lives towards any noble purpose, first electrify the imagination of young foreigners and then proceed to show themselves as they really are, heartless, uncultivated, shallow, and above all mercenary, the powerful fascination produced by their charms is immediately destroyed. So here we have Flora saying that there is spiritual superiority expected of women in spite of any costume. So Marianismo and Republican Motherhood are more important. It makes me wonder if Flora feels threatened by her fellow countrywomen's freedom in wearing this costume, and maybe she wants to do it herself. She says that the saya and manto are admirable so long as traditional values are not challenged, such as longevity of marriage or sexual purity. So flirting in church is fine so long as the action redeems men, so long as that's your purpose. So who goes flirting to make the men better? I don't know who does that. Like, I'm gonna go flirting just because he's gonna be better for it. You flirt for yourself, girl. Okay. Correcting 19th century woman. So the last section that we're gonna read, this may upset you. So for all that, the women of Lima dominate the men because they are so far above them in intelligence and willpower. But the stage of civilization Peruvians have reached is still far behind ours in Europe. Nowhere in Peru is there an institution for education of either sex. The intelligence can develop only through its native resources. This is the preeminence of Lima's women. However inferior they are to the European women from a moral aspect, must be attributed to the superior intelligence with which God has endowed them. That's, you don't say that about your sisters. Okay, 19th century brain. Stop arguing with your diva, girl. Okay, so calling Peruvian men inferior to women is hardly flattering to any Peruvian, men or woman. Peru is not devoid of educational institutions, Flora. Peru boasts the first university in South America, the Universidad de San Marcos, which was founded on May 12, 1551. But she's right in that practical education is not available to the masses. So education was available if you had money for it. European women, to her, are morally superior. So this is where her social Darwinism is coming through. She creates this dichotomy between morals live in Europe and intelligence lives in Lima. And these are polar opposites and may not exist together. Completely false. And she measures civilization by a culture's assimilation to European values. So this was most obvious to me throughout that last quote. So in this episode 16 of Latin American Divas, titled Flora Tristán, Tapada limeña, Tourism, Ethnography, and Europhilia, 1838, we explored the transition between Colonial Marianismo and Republican Motherhood. We studied female pragmatism, empiricism, and positivism through the lens of Flora Tristán, by all means foreigner who had family in Peru. And we also talk about Flora Tristán's 19th century socialism/feminism. Flora was concerned for 1. Assimilation to European values as a sign of civilization, 2. Scientific positivist ethnography, 3. Eroticization of Peruvian females on behalf of the European male spectator, nation building through women's superiority and intelligence, but only if they caught up to their European sisters, 5. We're not clear whether she admires or derides the Tapada limeña. I'm calling on experts of psychoanalysis to explain this one to me. Is she jelly of the limeña or is she simply deriding her? I'm not sure, I can't tell. In the next episode, episode 17, we're going to go over Josefa Acevedo Gomez. For this, we're leaving Peru and we're going to Colombia again, where we're going to study the Ángel Tutelar, or the duty of woman to be her family's angel. And this is most evident in advice books. So your 19th century equivalent of Cosmo magazine, that was what Josefa Acevedo Gomez was writing. She, for example, one interesting excerpt reminds me of my own upbringing, says that household chores ensure model femininity by restricting movement and joy. She quotes, quote, A girl who mends her own dresses does not frisk about wildly. Neither does she play with dog, play mischievously with fire, climb trees, not ever forget restraint and composure with which a young lady must behave, unquote. So these kind of advice tidbits that inform women's behavior are going to be the focus of the next episode. So thank you once again for taking the time to learn about Latin American women from their perspective of their grandmothers, mothers, and daughters right here on Cronista de Indias, where an episode drops mostly every Friday. Though, as I said, this week we're going to have a treat of a bunch of episodes coming through. I have time to record more than one. As always, a million thanks for viewing, liking, sharing the episodes, and as the motto says up there, do epic shit.